Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of Let's Chat with GB. I have with me a very special guest, someone who won a national award when she was just in her 20s, has written 7 best-selling books across multiple genres. I give you Trisha Das, the accomplished author who has written on so many diverse topics, and she is our guest today on Let's Chat with GB.
I'm very happy to be here.
We've of course, known each other so many years, and you've always had this knack for storytelling. Where did that passion for storytelling really come from, and how did that actually become eventually a profession?
My grandfather, my Nanaji, was an amazing storyteller, and he died when I was 14. But until 14, right from the age of about 2 or 3, he used to put me on his lap, and he used to tell me stories, mostly from the Ramayana and the Mahabharat. And I remember just like soaking those stories in like a sponge, And the way he told them, it was like not the religious bhakti type of way, but like interesting ways of how characters dealt with each other, and stories that really connected to us as a family, as modern people, that sort of thing. So he had a knack for storytelling. And he used to talk about his friends and, back in the day when we were in school. And, so he was a very good storyteller.
Right.
So I think that's where I got my love of storytelling. And then, of course, a lot of influences. So my Nani ji, his wife, used to read a lot. And we had a lending library that was right next to the house. So the guy who ran the lending library knew my Nani ji very well. So he would bring a sack full of books every day, and we would sit and we would literally swim in them, right? So I think the combination of growing up reading a lot, and listening to my grandfather tell stories, sort of gave me that love of storytelling and the love of books. And then, as you know, your wife and me, we went to school together and college together. And we had this kind of thing in college. Everybody else would be sleeping, and I would tell them bedtime stories.
Yep.
And they loved those stories.
Right.
And they were like, Trisha, you gotta write a book one day, I was like, maybe I will.
Yeah.
I think that's where it started.
Wow, lo and behold, right? And that's exactly what happened.
That's what happened. That's what happened.
It wasn't the books where it actually started with, because I think you were in your early 20s where you decided to become also a filmmaker, and you did Fiddlers on the Thatch, and that got you a national award. Which is super. And at the time, I know we were like, wow. And we hadn't even figured out what we want to do with our lives. And you were already winning national awards. And at Shreveport, you were doing, showings and all of that. What was it like to, in your mid-20s to actually get those kind of accolades and more?
Well, I think at the age of 26, when I won the national award, I might have been the youngest director at the time, but I'm not sure. That's not a verified fact. But I didn't step into book writing immediately. I did step into storytelling immediately. So after college, I had this weird idea that I would be an actress. And so for about 6 months after college, I went around doing auditions and stuff like that. And I very quickly realized that in front of the camera was not where I wanted to be. I remember there was a time when I was doing, I think it was a travel show or some sort of hosting for some TV show.
Right.
And I looked at the script and I'm reading it because, you have to memorize your lines, right? And I'm looking at it and thinking I could do so much better. And I remember asking the director, I was like, can I change it just a little bit? And he's like, no, because he's not used to anchors or hosts changing their lines. This is back in the day, right? And he refused to let me change it. So like cringeworthy stuff that I was just saying into the camera at the time. And I remember thinking, this is not where I need to be. I need to be behind. I need to be the one writing these scripts and telling these stories. So that's when I went into filmmaking. And as you and I both know, writing in those days, we're talking about the late 90s, early 2000s. It was not a very lucrative profession. So I started filmmaking. And I also started writing a novel on a PC in my dad's office at the time. About 150 pages into the novel, the computer crashed, and I was 21 years old, and I hadn't backed up a damn thing. So I lost 150 pages of a book that I'd been working on the side. And then I went into filmmaking, where I did a lot of screenwriting. And I think that's when I really kind of realized that I have a talent for it, you know. And so then it was kind of a natural progression from filmmaking after I won the award,
Right.
to kind of say, okay, now I want to take a step back. What else do I love to do? I've gotten to this point, and now I want to chase my passion.
Right.
And it's a viable time in my career to chase my passion as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
So I started writing books. But the National Award was a pretty special time. And Fiddlers on the Thatch was a pretty special film. And it was one of those films that kind of comes across once in a lifetime in terms of subjects, you know.
Right.
And I was very lucky and very fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time. And it was a huge surprise.
One of the influences growing up, were your grandparents, and they would bring the Mahabharat and the Ramayana. And interestingly, one of your most popular books that you actually did come out with was influenced by the Mahabharat.
Yes.
So was it a connection, and what was the thought process, when you started creating and writing, Draupadi Kuru and the others? What was the thought process behind that?
So remember I told you that I used to do bedtime stories, right, during college for your wife and my other friends, right?
Right.
A lot of those stories were Mahabharat stories.
Oh.
And what I used to always get back from them while I was talking was like, oh my God, this is like a soap opera. I mean, there's affairs, infidelity, there's polygamy, there's all polyandry, of course, there's betrayal.
Yeah.
It literally is like a TV soap opera.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, well, why are people so surprised? Of course it is, But I realized most people were approaching it with so much of a religious point of view
Right.
that they didn't see the wonderful bits of storytelling that were in there and the multitude of tiny little stories that were in there. So I always thought at the time, I'm going to rewrite the Mahabharat in my way, right?
Wow.
And in 2008, I started, quote unquote, rewriting the Mahabharat. I didn't get very far. I wrote about 8 stories, so about 8 chapters. And then after that, I was like, this is too big. I can't do this. So I released that as a book, the 8
Right.
stories called Mahabharat Reimagined. And I remember thinking at the time, no, this is not it.
Right.
I haven't got it out of me.
Yep.
And then so one day I remember I was in Johannesburg at the time. I was living there. And my husband and I were in this tiny little apartment, and I had my laptop in front of me, and I'd written 2 non-fiction books before that. And I remember thinking, what would be a really wacky thing to happen, right? And I was like, what if I wrote a sequel to the Mahabharat? So instead of rewriting it
Right.
or reimagining it, what happens afterwards? They all go to heaven, but then what, And I wrote one paragraph about Bhim showing off with an imaginary mace in heaven, and Draupadi having to look at him for the 5 millionth time and clap
Right.
because she's so sick of it now.
Sure,
It's
sure.
like been
Yeah.
there, done that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I wrote the first paragraph, and I laughed and laughed and laughed, and I thought, you know what, this is worth building on.
Right.
And that's how I got the idea for Draupadi Kuru, which is basically about Draupadi and 3 other women from the Mahabharat, Kunti, who is the mother of the Pandavas,
Right.
and Amba, who eventually became Shikandi, and Gandhari, who's the mother of the Kauravas, coming down to modern day Delhi from heaven because they're bored,
Right.
and having a 30-day adventure of a lifetime, And it became exactly what it was supposed to be,
Yep.
a funny sort of a little bit of social commentary, but mostly just taking these women and giving them a second chance,
Yeah.
in a funny way. And that's
I
what
love
it
that.
was.
Yeah. I just love how the inspiration actually came and how from an idea you really built on that. And then there was also a sequel to that as well, right?
There was. So the women came down to earth, and then in the second book, which is called The Misters Kuru,
Right.
the 5 Pandavas come down to earth. And the reasoning behind that was, I never felt that the Pandavas got their due. And
Okay.
this is actually funny to say because people think the women never got their due. And that's a well-known fact. They didn't, right? They all had very unhappy lives. But the Pandavas individually never really got their due as well. I mean, they were always banded together as a fivesome, right? And they had to do everything together. I was like, what if I take them apart
Yeah.
and treat them as individuals instead of always having to be together and do everything together all the time?
Right.
How would their story and how would their second chance go? So the second book and the sequel is about that. The Mr. Guru was very, very different. So they said, write the sequel. And I wrote the sequel in 4 months. And then it came out 8 months later. So it was very different from the first one.
And now I also hear where there's a lot of aspiring authors who really struggle, to get a publisher to even come their way, and then they consider between, self-publishing or, again, using, maybe a slightly less reputed publisher. It's a bit of a struggle. So advice to young authors, aspiring authors, what would your advice be to them on this front?
It's very, very important for an aspiring author to find their voice. And a voice that is not necessarily special, but a voice that is their own. Spend some time developing that voice, because that is what people want. That's what publishers are looking for. That's what readers are looking for. They don't want a book that they can find on 20 other Amazon pages.
Correct.
It has to be something that is uniquely you, and then good at the same time. So I feel like a lot of people are in a very big hurry to get published.
Correct.
But don't spend enough time investing in themselves and the product before they jump to that publishing process. And then what happens? The publisher says, sorry, not interested. Or the publisher says, this has promise,
Right.
go back, work on it a little bit more, and then come back,
Yep.
And I say, work on it. Draupadi Kuru, I spent 2.5 years, 2 years approximately working on it. 4 drafts later.
Right.
So be critical of yourself before you actually send it out to publishers. The other thing that I find is, as far as traditional publishing is concerned, because I have only done traditional publishing as of right now. I think one thing that publishers always tell me is that the submissions that we get a lot of the times are incomplete.
Sure.
Right? They don't come with properly written query letters, or the drafts are not in good format, or there's a ton of mistakes, and so authors are like, well, you're going to edit it anyway, so why do I need to put that much work into it? No, these days everybody wants a finished product, even at submission, and then they're going to finish it further. So I say work really, 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 really hard, then submit it to everybody, traditional publishing. If that doesn't work, right, self-publishing has been a very, very lucrative option for a lot of authors.
Sure.
What I say about self-publishing is it can be incredibly lucrative, but you have to do all the work yourself, right? So right from the writing, which is your job as a writer, but also in terms of proofreading and formatting and editing and all of those little things that authors don't have to do with traditional publishers. Designing your cover, and the biggest one, distributing it,
So true.
and marketing it, So everything falls on your own shoulders. So I haven't been able to do it, but I know a lot of people who go from door to door, pitching and pitching and pitching, and they can do it, and they've done really, really well.
Right.
So if you have that kind of tenacity and stamina, self-publishing is a great option.
Thank you for sharing your insights there, because we do have a lot of our listeners who are aspiring authors, and I think that just gives a lot of clarity to them, for sure. Writer's block, okay, it's a big point with so many, and they have this concept, they get started, and then they just get into this funk, and it's just kind of hard to beat that. Has it ever happened to you? And be advice to people who might be going through that. What would be some ways to just overcome that?
Writer's block is a necessary evil that I think all writers have to deal with. I personally deal with it at least once a month, if not more, right? And it's underconfidence, right? It's like, okay, is what I'm doing good enough? Are people gonna like it? And then you get in your head and you're like, and then boom, your brain freezes, right? So that happens to me at least once a month. And I say right through it. And what I try and do religiously every day is write something. Even if it means that the next day I'm going to go read it and be like, this is utter crap. I cannot believe this came out of you, right? But I wrote, right? So writing is very much a practice.
Sure.
It's very much an active thing that you do every single day.
I love that. It's almost like, the tiny habits that we talk about, that even on days when you're not feeling it, or even on days when, you're on vacation or you're unwell, just do something. So it'll just keep you in momentum as well.
Yeah, it trains the brain, you know, and when a human being, as a human being, if you have an excuse, you're gonna use it, right? When there are no excuses, and when your brain's not hanging around waiting for inspiration,
Right.
it just gets down to what it has to do. It will kick in.
Oh, agree completely. And the excuses piece, I mean, at the GBA, we even have these bands where it says no excuses,
Yep.
and I do whatever it takes.
Yep.
And the whole thing is that, we talk about the fact that, either you're going to build the life that, you want to build, or you're going to be making excuses, but you can't do both.
Exactly.
So very, very important to, just constantly be in action. So
Exactly.
thank you for mentioning that. The role of mentors and maybe an accountability partner, has that ever happened for you, that you've had, someone that times when you did feel stuck, there was someone that you could just reach out to as a mentor or as an accountability partner, and the role that they've played in your journey?
I think many people do that. For me personally, my husband, the first one I think, is who I approach when I'm stuck with something.
Right.
He's not an author; he's a banker. But the fact is that just human common sense is available, commonly, as they say. And then, of course, people in the industry, other fellow writing friends,
Right.
there is an advantage to having a tribe around you who supports you and who believes in you, I have had mentors in the past. As a filmmaker, I had a wonderful mentor, and he gave me a lot of opportunities that perhaps I wouldn't have got because I was all of 22 years old when I made my first film.
Sure.
So he believed in that talent, and he believed that I could do it. It has helped me a great deal in the past. Just having someone who, for example, he gave me a film to do about a particular personality. I won't take names.
Sure.
And I had to make a film about her. And she was a very well known celebrity in the charitable world, as an activist and all of that.
Sure.
She treated me like shit,
Uh-huh.
right? And so I was pissed off.
Right.
And I went to him and I was like, what do I do? I don't want to do this film. That means hanging out with her for 3 months. I don't want to do it, right? And I think at that point, I learned a very valuable lesson about professionalism and how you may not like it sometimes. And this person potentially, their respect needs to be earned,
Sure.
so don't expect it. So the lesson that I have to work hard
Right.
to overcome my own emotions, to be professional enough. And then in the end of that film, I wouldn't say she respected me, but I felt like she was a lot nicer. But I did work very, very hard. It was an extremely unpleasant shoot. I hated every minute of it, but I did what I needed to do, and I think the film came out well because of that.
Interesting. Yeah. Another thought that just came to mind. I mean, you were mentioning about Deep's and being also a great area of support. You also have two boys, who are now 12 and 15. What about distractions around the house? Because sometimes when you're in the zone, okay, and potentially there's things happening, how do you keep distractions out of the equation?
No excuses, right? Remember, no excuses. I've told my family and I tell everybody I'm a professional, right? This is my job, right? And just like I would respect my husband Deep's job because he actually goes to an office and sits there for a day and comes back, why does that require more respect than the fact that I'm sitting at home in my pajamas maybe, writing, but that is still a job. And so I think it's about the expectations that you set around you. And as a mother, there are a lot of demands on your time, but there are a lot of demands on everybody's time, right? People make it work. And I'm a firm believer in balance. I've always separated the various aspects of my life very well. When I walk into my study, I'm a professional author. When I walk out of the study, I'm everything else to everybody else.
Let's talk about challenges that may have popped up in the journey as an author. So anything that, there came a point where you said, oh my God, I don't know how am I going to overcome this. So any challenges that, really strike you as something that you might want to talk about?
Well, in terms of as an author, so I've written 7 books, right? Actually, 7 books that have been published. I've actually written 8 books. The eighth one was somewhere in the middle. I think I wrote it in 2017.
Okay.
And it was a non-fiction book, and it was just a funny book about motherhood, right? About not wanting to be a mother, then becoming a mother, and it was called Screwed and Unscrewed.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
And how I ended up screwed and then completely unscrewed, right? That was the whole thing.
Right. Right.
And it was just funny stuff about motherhood, and how I became a mother, my journey. And nobody wanted it, right? No publisher. Everyone who read it thought, oh wow, we love this book. But nobody wanted to publish it. And I kept asking people, why? If you love this book as much as you love it, why don't you want to publish it? There's no market for it, right? And again, at the time you spend months and months and months working on something, putting it together, people love it.
Yeah.
It's not like people don't, right? My own family, who I use as beta readers and stuff, right? Extremely critical, right? I think the most critical is my brother, right? He read it, said the funniest book I've ever read, right? So everyone who read it loved it. There was just no market for it. It's sitting on my laptop right now. It'll never see the light of day, probably. And that was, I think, a big one for me. It was another valuable lesson. I mean, in retrospect, you can say it was a valuable lesson, but let's face it, at the time, I was really, really disappointed and very upset about the outcome with that book. And then I had to move on and write another book after that. Nobody wanted to publish it.
Right. You never know. I mean, it still might see the light of day. You might have. I keep reading about all the the IPOs coming out with companies are now related with babies, and you have the baby oils and the Mahabharats, and who knows, maybe you just reach out to them, they'd be like, yeah, this is perfect, we'll
everything has
take
its
it out.
time,
So,
right?
yeah,
Everything has its time. Back then there were no baby mama books. Now there's a dime a dozen.
Right.
But now I've become a certain kind of author, and then I'm not really specializing in the mama industry.
Right. And sometimes we get a degree of criticism. We think we've just put out the best possible thing, but it's possible that your editors and publishers come back and then there's some criticism that you may not agree with 100%. What happens in that case? I mean, how do you then find that fine line, that balance, saying that okay, this is how much I'm willing to give up, and they're like this is how much we're willing to give up, and you find that middle line. How does that really happen?
I think there's 2 types of criticisms. There's fair criticism and there's unfair criticism. So like anything that I think is unfair,
Right.
for example, I write a great book, nobody wants to publish it, I think that's unfair.
Right.
Even though I understand that it's a decision based on bottom line considerations, right? But in my mind, that's unfair. When an editor comes back to me and says, this is not working,
Right.
can you redo this? For whatever reason, it's not working. In my mind, that's a fair criticism. As an author, sometimes you can get so buried in your own work, you do not have the capacity, the capability to see it from an objective point of view and from the point of view of a reader, an audience member, right? Because you're too deep in that world. So an editor is coming at that book from an outside point of view. You have to respect that. If you respect the editor, which for me is a very important thing, I have to respect the editors I work with, right? I think that any criticism I get on that end is fair criticism, and I always welcome it. And in my personal experience with the 7 books that I have published, any kind of editorial input that I have got that I have deemed as fair, it has made the book better. But sometimes it's unfair criticism. So for example, in my new book, which is called Never Meant to Stay, it's a romance, rom-com basically. It will be released in India in May by Bloomsbury. And so for this particular book, it was written at the time for an American market, right? For a global audience. And the subject matter is a joint family. Okay. Now, what is a joint family? Nobody outside India knows what a joint family is,
Agreed.
right? I did not say anything about joint family, non-joint family. Yep. It was just a story of a family, right? which as an Indian is perfectly normal
Correct.
to have adult children living with elderly parents, right? Now, in the West, it's not the norm. So my editor came back and said, could you please explain this phenomena, right, of a joint family? I was like, no, I'm not going to explain it, right? This is India, you know, and I'm not going to pander or whatever, you know.
Right.
So I did not say that it was a joint family. I did not talk about how in India we live in, you know, in joint families.
Right.
And I kept the book as it is. So in my mind, that was unfair criticism because it wasn't to make the book better.
Right.
It was to pander to an unfamiliar audience, which I didn't want to do because I personally believe that my readers are extremely intelligent and we live in a very connected world. And if anyone needs to understand what a joint family is, good old Google is always there, right? So those are, in my mind, there's two distinctions, unfair and fair criticism.
So it's interesting that you mentioned your new book, and we were also having a discussion about how even the concept of book tours have changed and what it was like traditionally and what it is now. So walk us through that. What's really happening in the world of, the new age world of Instagram and you know, new age book tours, etc.?
You know, in the old days when I wrote my first book, you basically had a couple of articles in the newspaper, and then you went from bookshop to bookshop. You had reader events. You had a big launch party with which the publisher threw for you, and you'd invite all your family and friends, and then you'd get a bunch of people coming in and buying the book, and you'd attend literary festivals, and your books would be sold there. So as an author, you kind of really had to be on the road with your book for it to sell. And then, of course, bookstores were a big part of that. And the now progression that I've seen to the point where today 99% of it happens on social media.
Really?
And so I'm currently on a book tour right now as we speak. And it's all happening on social media. So I'll be sitting in my study at home, conducting a book tour all over the world, in the US, in the UK, along with promotions that are happening online, connecting with influencers in all these countries and all of that stuff, and other people promoting in their territories with their followers. Everything is now online. And I was speaking to a friend the other day, and she's like, when are you having your launch party? And I'm like, no one does launch parties anymore. And even if they do it for themselves, like it's a vanity thing, you know, or the publisher does it for the author to make them feel good. But books don't sell at launch parties. The only people who come to launch parties are family and friends. So essentially saying, hey, I released a book, come to my party. You know, no one does, because people don't go out anymore. They get all their information online. If they want to buy a book, they'll go to the book's Amazon page. They'll go to the book's Goodreads page. They'll see the reviews. If the reviews and the blurb and everything looks good, they're going to buy the book. They don't give two shits about the author.
Yeah.
They don't care what the author is saying. None of that. If they connect with it, they're going to buy it. So sales strategies are now just completely around that and social media. And the author's role in having to get out there and do stuff has decreased, a fact that I'm actually quite thankful for. And sales numbers have increased as well, because it's not like an event-based thing. Anyone can click and buy, right? And the other thing that's actually with the new book that's been amazing is when you sell in the West, and especially a rom-com, the Kindle market is huge. So people actually download the vast majority of their books now. And very few people actually buy paperbacks unless it's like a bookshelf book or a coffee table book, you know. So the Kindle market has worked really well for me as well. And that's all online on social media.
Phenomenal.
So it's completely changed.
And you're saying now that there's less involvement from the author's perspective, and sales are up, so it's like a win-win situation for everyone.
The author is still involved, right? So I feel like on my, say, Instagram page, right? I am there every day, and I get comments and messages and posts and all of that stuff. I'm interacting with my readers every day. If they have a question, they get it answered immediately. If they have an opinion or a review or whatever, they get an immediate response from the author, you know. So that connection that an author has with their reader is there for whoever wants it, especially on apps like Instagram and stuff like that, you know. But the author is not needed to sell anymore. That's old school. I think the pandemic has made a big difference as well. Everyone's doing things digitally and remote now, and I think book selling has also kind of just gone in that direction.
Yeah. You know, especially for Indian readers, is Audible now picking up, and you know, has it become a forum which a lot of people are now using? So what's really happening in the entire Audible and the audiobook space?
I think in terms of the world globally, it's been a huge thing. In terms of India, less so. India is a very price sensitive market. It's also a market that people want paperbacks, you know. People want to hold things, you know. Kindle is not as popular in India as it would be in the West, you know. It's also a price sensitivity thing. Books are a lot cheaper over here. Why would you pay 160 rupees for a Kindle copy if you can get a paperback for 229 rupees, you know? So it's an economics thing, you know. But in the West, Audible and Kindle are, I think, the vast majority of, especially the romance market or the thrillers market, you know. And for instance, Audible, you know, I was talking to a reader about this the other day. She said, I have ADHD. And, you know, in ADHD, you don't like reading words on paper, or dyslexia, or so many other neurodiverse conditions, right, which kind of hinder the enjoyment of a paperback book, right, or even a Kindle book. Audible has kind of stepped in, and she said, I read your book in tandem, Audible as well as Kindle.
Interesting.
So it helped her to keep up with the words and stuff like that. So Audible is amazing because people can do other stuff while they're reading it, and also people who are neurodiverse can now enjoy the fiction as much as people earlier. And it's so sad that we actually had times where people like that used to be considered dumb or whatever, you know. So we are now living in an age where neurodiversity is a wonderful thing. It's what makes the world go round, and things like Audible and you know, WhisperNet and a whole bunch of them sort of plug into that.
What about keeping the attention of younger readers, you know, especially Gen Zs, I mean, the entire Instagram generation, their attention spans are, I mean, even when it comes to long form video, like I'm sure even this podcast will have to be broken up into, you know, certain segments just to have them actually go through it. How are you grabbing and keeping their attention as an author? Because I think even from the perspective of expectations have changed. So are you keeping that in mind when you're writing content as well?
I think for me, writing and representing a contemporary world is really important. So yes, in terms of writing what's actually happening around me, yes. So things like, do I address AI? Do I address social media? Do I address emojis and that sort of thing? You know, just general stuff that never used to be there in the past. Yes, I do. On the other hand, do I pander by writing words like sus or cap or, you know, any kind of sort of YouTube expressions that are in one day and out the next? No, I don't. I think most Gen Zs right now aren't old enough really to read my books, but millennials are. So I think it's a maturity thing as well. As you grow older and you're looking to read a certain type of genre and you want an ultra contemporary book, it doesn't necessarily have to reflect your social media habits or anything like that, but still represents an authentic world in whatever way that exists, in a kind of a universal way. So everyone's not gaming on YouTube, right? Everyone's not skydiving. So appeal to things that are universal to all of us, and then the contemporary things that surround us. So I keep track of those, yes, definitely. But I don't pander.
Any thoughts in terms of what is the future of both storytelling and writing actually hold in the new AI world?
The AI world, I mean, we're all talking about it, right? It was funny. A bunch of authors and I got together and we were like talking about this whole thing that AI is going to take over novel writing and we're all going to be replaced by AI one day, right? And so we all went on whichever AI, I'm not going to take names, whichever AI platform there was there. And I personally went on the platform and I was like, write a passage in the style of Trisha Das, right? Which is what all of us were doing. and we all compared our passages. And I have to say, it was one of the funniest experiences I have ever had. Like the AI passage that was written about in my style,
Sure.
right? Was like, she stared at the temple with its walls and its stone and its statues of Kama, the god of love. And she said, "Where am I?" Right? And then the answer to the riddle occurred to her, and she whispered into the air, "It is love. The answer is love." I mean, right? I was like, AI ain't taking my job anytime soon, not like this.
Yeah.
And Deeps, I showed that passage to my husband, right? And he's like, if it was 30% better, would it be yours? And I was like, no, no, not yet. I don't know if it will in the future, but not yet. No, AI ain't taking book writing.
And we see a lot of both fear and opposition. I mean, even in Hollywood, you had like a big strike that went down, and there's a whole bunch of things happening. And I think you're right. I think it's too premature to be taking AI that seriously as a replacement. I mean, things change. Just in our last episode, we had the CEO of NASCOM who was here, and she was talking about some of the technological advancements that are happening, and she said it's scary. It's also like exhilarating and exciting that what it could actually lead to, but I think the jury's still out in terms of what's really going to happen, and
it's going to keep changing. It's going to keep evolving, definitely. I mean, deepfakes and stuff, so scary, right? And so obviously the writing is going to get better. And I think publishers are also using methods in which to contain the privacy of books, right? Because AI really only can be intelligent with the information that it receives, right? So the less information you put out into the public space that is copyright free, right? The better. So, for instance, PDF copies in the past of books used to be, widely distributed, right?
Correct.
Those kinds of things aren't done anymore. So I think the industry is kind of trying, in its own limited sort of way, to contain the effects of AI. But the jury's still out. We have no idea where it's going to go.
Yeah. Yourself, personally, are you more of an old school person who wants to hold a traditional book, or you more of a Kindle kind of person yourself?
If you ask any author, they will say, "Oh yeah, any day prefer the traditional, the feel of the book, the smell of the book, the weight of the book." I love all of those things. Nothing smells better than a freshly printed book, right? But do I read most of my books on Kindle? Yeah, I do. It's easier.
Right.
It's easier. You don't have to wait. You don't have to order. You don't have to do anything. Just press a button and you're done.
So true.
So I, just like any other reader, have chosen my convenience over the romance of it. And I read most of my books on Kindle. But yes, I will always intellectually say that I love the feel of a book.
Right. Yeah, Mrinalini's the same. I mean, there's so many times that I see her running through like 4 books in a week.
Yep.
And it's just, on the Kindle. And I think it just makes it so convenient. My side, I'm still, I think, old school. I still prefer, to have my paperback. So even my hardbound books.
Audiobooks as well, right?
I do. So in fact,
does audiobooks as well.
And it's just a great way to, be spending your time on the road.
Yeah.
I normally wouldn't listen to the radio. So it's either a podcast or it's an audiobook.
I think that's what appeals to Deeps about it also. The fact that he can be doing other stuff while he's quote unquote reading,
Right.
And again, that's the beauty of audiobooks or audio anything really.
Agreed. Yeah. What do you see next, happening in the industry overall? Like any trends that you see, anything that you see people, moving towards or moving away from from an industry perspective?
I think in India, unfortunately, the bottom line has become, in traditional publishing, the bottom line has become more important than the love of literature, unfortunately. Old school people are being edged out of the industry and replaced with people who care more about the bottom line. True lovers of great fiction and even non-fiction are few and far in between now in the publishing industry. And a certain part of me doesn't blame them. At the end of the day, publishing has traditionally always been a loss-making industry, but people have done it because they love books, right? And they love literature, and they want to put good stuff out there in the world for no other reason than it's important to put good stuff out there in the world, right?
True.
But I think that is now changing. So, for instance, you'll have a lot of emphasis now on money-making books, celebrity autobiographies, self-help books written by well-known authors.
Right.
So those kinds of things are kind of taken over.
Right.
Religious books, things that people who don't read buy.
Sure. Sure.
And less so for people who are active readers.
Yep.
And so I think the books that are really suffering from that movement are mid-list books, literature especially. So you have literature books that are now selling 2,000 copies or 3,000 copies. And they're not making any money, and the authors are working for years on them. And these are the books that are winning awards and that sort of thing that you see on social media, so many awards, right? But the actual sales don't reflect that. So it's quite sad. As a society, we don't read those kinds of books as much anymore.
Correct.
And we really only focus on beneficial or gossipy, those kinds of books now. So that's an unfortunate trend. What I do think is a positive, I'd want to also mention a positive thing, because it's not all negative, right? I do think that the young generation, Gen Z especially, likes books, in general. So for a while there, we were kind of losing a lot of readers. And I feel like now with this generation, they're very passionate. They're not distracted by a lot of things that previous generations have gone through, right? And books are a big part of their existence and their world. So I do see a lot of good stuff to come. I just hope that continues.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. You're spot on that as well. So, interestingly, when you started out as a filmmaker and then, of course, an author, do you see any of your books making it to Bollywood, or just coming out in any form of film?
Well, I have had offers. So a lot of authors sell options, right, for their books, a film adaptation rights, basically. They sell options. Very few of those films actually end up getting made. So I kind of have gone down that road a couple of times. Also, my Mahabharat books, let's face it, this is not the time to make those films, right? But yes, I have had for my new book a lot of interest. And so fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And we see a new book coming out in India probably by about May?
By May, yeah. That's what I've been told. Yeah. So hopefully it'll do well here as well.
Right. Yeah, interesting. I actually did listen to a sample on Audible yesterday.
Yeah.
And Mrinalini's already, I think, had access to a copy. She had really good things to say about it. So all the best on that side. What's next? What do you have on the cards coming up over the next maybe couple of years or so?
I've got another book coming out this year. It's 2024.
Yeah.
I've got another book coming out this year. End of the year in the West, and then hopefully in India very soon after that. It's another rom-com. And this time it involves Indian characters, but it's set in Scotland. Nice. So that should be a lot of fun. I mean, I'm having the time of my life writing this. So I'm having a good time writing it, and we're going to be going into edits around April, May. And then hopefully it should be out by the end of the year.
Fantastic. Good luck for that.
Thank you.
And advice to young aspiring authors, people who are thinking about it and, just on the fence, haven't really committed. What would your advice be to young aspiring authors?
First thing that you do if you want to write a book, go on Amazon, check if it's already there.
Yep.
Because I promise you, 9 times out of 10, there's not just one person who's written your book, there's like 50 people who've written your book. So there aren't that many new ideas anymore. If no one else has written your book, right, ask yourself why.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, good point.
There might be a good reason why no one's written that book.
Yeah.
So do your research. I'm a big research junkie, right? I do tons and tons and tons of research. I mean, I'm writing rom-coms, but I do a ton of research for those also. And people are like, what are you researching? And I'm like, research everything, right?
Sure.
So do your research if you want to write a book. I had one guy tell me, "Oh, you wanted to write a book. What would happen? Batman versus Superman. Oh, was it Batman? I can't remember.
Okay.
Two Marvel superheroes, right, against each other.
Or DC
What
in
would
this
happen in the sorry, I don't know my Marvel DC universe,
Right.
but two superheroes battling it out, a battle between the two of them. Now, whereas I think that would appeal to about 5,000 people, yes, you know. Do I think that that's a viable book idea? Maybe I'm completely outdated, old fogey, but no, I don't, right? So I say, look at your idea, figure out whether either it's already been done or whether it's actually a good idea or not, and then put your nose to the ground and research and research and research. I particularly recommend organizing your research and structuring your story in your book before you write the book. They're called, plotters and pansters, people who plot and people who just write by the seat of their pants. Right. And Stephen King is a very well-known pantster. He just kind of sits down and writes. Well, I say to aspiring authors, Stephen King can do that. You shouldn't,
Agreed.
You should sit down and plot everything out and have a proper structure before you go into it. Because for a first timer, writing a book is an incredibly challenging, confusing, tiring thing to do, 100%. Right? And you have hit 50% of your book and you're ready to give up because, oh my God, that middle, So you have to structure. Put it together like you would a PowerPoint presentation or whatever, and then sit down and write. So the actual writing process should be the very last thing that you do. But there's so much work you need to do before that.
And any resources that you would recommend that they turn to for some kind of help as well?
Yes, other books.
Okay.
Read. If you want to write a book about goats, read a ton of books about goats, If you want to write a romance novel, read a lot of romance novels. Find the good authors in there. See what you like about those good authors. Right. Make notes, right? Study it, or do a creative writing course. I don't know, but study it, and read a lot.
Love it. Couldn't agree more. And concluding question, I'm going to put you on the spot in this one as well. Okay, what is going to be Trisha Das's legacy? Like, what is it that you want to be remembered for?
I don't know what my legacy is going to be. I'm only 7 books old. Yep. I've got at least 40 more in me. So at the end of it, maybe people are like, she wrote a shitload of books. Okay. That's it. I don't know. I don't think about stuff like that, really. I write because I love writing. And I love sharing my writing with readers. And it makes me happy. That's it.
Love it. Thank you so much. I'm glad you were on Let's Chat with GB. And where could people find some of your works? And of course, we'll love to put the links, in our description as well. But you just want to let people know in terms of where can they follow you, Insta or otherwise?
Instagram at Trisha Das. And all my work can be found on Amazon. Yep. Amazon.com, Amazon.in, and if you're around the world, wherever your Amazon is, find me on the internet, Google it.
Love it. Well, thanks so much. Like I said, I'm glad we could make this happen, in between the busy schedule that you've had. Yes, I'm sure our listeners and viewers would love to, be in touch with you and read more about, all the great things that you've been putting out. And of course, make your next book, which is coming out in May, a real super success.
Well, thank you for having me. And talking about super successes, hello right there, right? And I wish you so much success with the podcast, but also, wow, you've come a long way with your business. And I've seen you as a 12-year-old, and I've now seen you as how old are you, 25? I don't know, and I'm so very proud of you.
Thank you. Yeah, and you're one of the early believers, and of course, also get the credit for putting Mrinalini and me together. So thank you so much for that as well.
I will take the full credit for that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Trisha Das, follow her, read her books. Really super person. and someone I highly recommend that you should follow, read, and also actively promote. Thank you very much.